All right, welcome everybody to Behind the Scenes, the interview coach. This time we're gonna dive into evals. I am having some technical issues with Zoom this morning. Usually we turn on captions. I did a webinar yesterday and captions were on my menu bar, and today they are not. So bear with me as I try to sort things out. Uh, just to help me out, open your chat window. Let me know where you're joining us from. It's always fun to see where everybody's joining from. If you first change the blue box, it's probably defaults to hosts and panelists. Change that to everyone so that we can all see where folks are coming from. Looks like a lot of responses are going to hosts and panelists, but that's okay. Keep them coming. I am going to that one that tells me you can hear me, which is amazing. And I'm going to spend about 10 more seconds trying to figure out my issue. And then we are going to dive right in. I don't know what's going on with Zoom, but I think I'm going to not care. So I apologize. Usually we like to have captions on to help folks where English is a second language. But I have searched far and wide and I cannot find it. So we are going to just dive in. Okay, so today we are going to, I'm glad to hear you can add attendees as, add captions as attendees. Thank you. That makes me feel a little bit better. Okay, so if any of you have been to my webinars before, I usually do pretty polished webinars about product discovery. This webinar is very different. This is a behind the scenes look. It's going to be a lot more raw. It's going to be just me telling you what I'm building. I have been, for the last 4 months, building an AI product. We'll get into the overview of that in just a little bit. I am forcing myself on a weekly basis to work out loud. I'm doing this, one, as a way to build in a little bit of accountability to keep myself sort of focused. And then two, there's so much AI hype out there. I'm tired of it. I'm sure you're tired of it. The last thing I want to do is contribute to product management is dead. No, product management is here forever. PRDs are dead. AI is ending everything. I am exhausted with it. And this is the way that I've found to continue to share and just to create a space for us to learn together. I know we're all trying to figure this stuff out. I'm saying this at the start because I want you to know that I am not an expert in this topic. I am just like you. I'm learning how to do this. I took a class that helped with evals in particular. We'll talk about that class. But this really, I want you to think about today's webinar is kind of Teresa's demo of what she's been doing. And what's hard is because a lot of people know my work from discovery. That's obviously a lot more polished. And so I just want to start with the caveat. This is a little bit of a different show. Okay. For those of you that are brand new to my work, I'm Teresa Torres. I'm the author of this book, Continuous Discovery Habits. My day job is I help product teams make better decisions about what to build. Through Product Talk Academy, we offer courses on the discovery habits. Again, I'm sharing this because you're going to see the AI tool I built is in this context. I'm not trying to pitch you today. I'm just trying to share what I'm doing. Okay, so as part of our academy, we have a number of courses that are on different habits. So we have a course about defining outcomes. We have a course about customer interviews. We have a course about my opportunity solution tree, etc. And in the spring, for those of you that saw my first behind the scenes webinar, the first couple of slides are going to be familiar to you, but don't worry, we're going to very quickly get into some new ground. In the spring, I broke my ankle in a hockey game. I had to have ankle surgery. I was laid up for about 3 months, had to stay off my feet. I had a lot of time on my hands, and I decided to dive into this question: what does generative AI make just now possible? This phrase is from a Marty Kagan blog post. It really just now possible. It really resonated with me. In fact, you're going to see an announcement from me here in a week or two about a new podcast called Just Now Possible. So stay tuned for that. I really thought about this question in the context of our courses. I have to pause because usually at the beginning of webinars, I do some housekeeping stuff and I skipped all of it. So let me back up. This webinar is being recorded. You will get an email with the recording 24 hours from now. So keep that in mind. You're welcome to share the recording with friends, family, colleagues, even on social media. However, the recording will expire on Sunday. This webinar will eventually be turned into a Product Talk blog post. So while the video will expire, eventually it will become publicly available on the Product Talk blog. But if you do have people that would benefit from this webinar, please feel free to share the recording when it comes out. Throughout the talk, if you have feedback, if you want to react to something, you have that Zoom React button on your toolbar that lets you give thumbs up and hearts and things like that. You also can use the chat box to share, to connect with each other, to tell me what resonates or what doesn't resonate. That always helps me. And then finally, at the end, I will do a Q&A session. And so you can use the Q&A box. You have a Q&A button on your toolbar. You can use the Q&A box to submit your questions. And then during the Q&A portion, I will pull questions from that window. Like I said, today's going to be a little bit rough. I'm still on my first cup of coffee. All right. Let's get back to just now possible. I see somebody has their hand up, and if you're having a technical issue, please put it in chat. If instead you have a question you want me to answer about the content, put that in the Q&A box, please. Okay. Yeah, I'm so excited to talk about evals too. I forgot all about the normal webinar stuff. So we're going to just roll with it. Okay, so I want you to imagine it's late March, early April 2025. This is a true story. I was sitting on my couch, foot propped up, recovering from ankle surgery, and I started to wonder what's just now possible due to generative AI. I was thinking about it in the context of our continuous interviewing course. What you need to know about this course is this is our course where we teach product teams how to conduct effective customer interviews. I teach a very specific brand of interviewing. This is going to be relevant because my AI product is an interview coach. Where we teach them how to collect specific stories about past behavior. And so this course is all about what to ask, how to listen better, and really how to collect a full, rich customer story. And in this class, all of our courses, we try to draw from what we know from research. They're very practice-oriented. So in this class, students come to class and we actually interview each other. So it's a very hands-on, practice-oriented class. And that's because I'm a big advocate of deliberate practice. So deliberate practice is this idea of the way that we build skill is we practice it and then we get feedback on that practice. And the feedback is really critical. And so in class, we give students a rubric so they can practice together and then they can give feedback according to the rubric. But our students aren't experts in interviewing yet, and deliberate practice really requires expert feedback. And so one of the questions I started to noodle on in April was, can we help students give each other better feedback on their practice interviews? And because I'm a learning wonk, I sort of framed this as, can we model what good feedback looks like? And this really led to some very early experiments with what is today Product Talk's interview coach. And that's the AI product I'm going to talk about. That's the AI product I'm going to dive deep into evals on. The other thing I want you to know is when I started this, let me just tell you a little bit about my background. I started my career in the late 90s. At that time, I was an interaction designer. But for those of you old enough to remember, companies weren't exactly hiring designers straight up. A lot of us were working in hybrid roles where we were actually front-end developers also doing the design work. And so early in my career, I did write code. I was a front-end developer, also a designer, and then later I moved into product management. This is relevant because you're going to see I get into code quite a bit here, but I cannot emphasize enough. At the beginning of this project, I didn't really identify as an engineer. Another part of this story is about 3 or 4 years ago, I read the book Ask Your Developer by one of the founders of Twilio. And that book really had a big influence on me. It's about how code can help you run a business. And it really opened my eyes to like how much in my own business running Product Talk and Product Talk Academy, I was doing manually or with human help where really I should have been using code. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I started to get back into coding. And so I have been coding recently, but very part-time. And so I share this so that you know that like I'm not a coding novice, but I'm certainly not a coding expert. And this is going to be relevant because I want those of you that don't code at all to get a really clear picture of what's possible and where you might need some engineering help. The book was called Ask Your Developer. I do, especially for business folks, I do strongly recommend it. And actually for engineers, it's a great way to help explain to your business how code can help with running the business. Okay, so that's a little bit of context. And then my goal today, you're going to see, my goal today is to make evals really accessible, to share about how I learned about this and how I'm putting it together for a pretty complex, a kind of complex product. A more complex product than I originally thought. Let's put it that way. So what does the interview coach look like? Here's how it works. Students conduct a practice interview. That could be in class or it could be on their own time. They record it. They get a transcript. We provide tools that help them upload a video and we give them an SRT file. If you're not familiar with SRT files, they're closed captioning files. They include the full transcript with timestamps. That file gets uploaded to the interview coach. So students submit it in our course platform as homework. And then pretty quickly afterwards, they get an email. And the email is their very detailed interview coach feedback. This is actually a real response. This is from the early days. This is not the full response. The full response doesn't actually fit on a slide very well. But you can see here, we're telling them this. I had to use, I don't think I actually conducted this interview, but that's okay. You can see here, the student gets an email. It tells them straight up, this feedback is coming from our AI coach. We're being very transparent about that. A big part of that reason is we are in beta. There are still some known issues with this coach. I still review literally every single email that goes out. This is a big part of my error analysis, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. But the way the email is structured is that this instance of the interview coach gives feedback on 4 different dimensions. So in the course, we teach collecting a story by teaching opening with a story-based question, that's dimension 1, setting the scene, that's dimension 2, building with a timeline, building the timeline, that's dimension 3, and then redirecting generalizations, that's dimension 4. This is the rubric we use in our course to teach interviewing. And you can see here, you're seeing the first 2 sections. So in a section, it's telling you the section name, you're getting a score, there's 3 values. Keep practicing, getting it, or great. Again, we're trying to encourage people here. And then within each section, we pull out an excerpt. This is a real excerpt from the student's interview. And then they get a tip about how to improve it. And then they get an overall coaching tip for this section. So you can see here, setting the scene, they got to keep practicing it. Here there's multiple excerpts telling them what they did well or what they needed to improve. The coaching tip would be down here at the bottom. And then this email continues with 2 more dimensions, building the timeline and redirecting generalizations. So this is basically what the interview coach is doing. It's doing a deep analysis of an interview. Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing the Claude comments. I use Claude a lot these days. I'm definitely obsessed with Claude Code, so that resonates with me. And that actually only went to hosts and panelists. So remember, change that blue box so that everybody can participate in the fun. Okay, so let's get into this. As I was building this coach, Federico, okay, so if you have taken our interviewing course and you want access to the coach, we are making this available to our alums. So all of our students get this while they're enrolled in the course, and we're making this available to all of their alums as long as they're part of our CDH membership program. So as part of that program, you get access to all of the past courses you've previously purchased. And that also unlocks the interview coach and the other AI tools we'll be building. So it's good to know there. Okay, as I was building this, I was looking at all these emails going out to students, and the interview coach was pretty good. But I was noticing some problems. And I'm kind of a perfectionist, especially when it comes to teaching. And I really wanted to make sure my interview coach was really good. And I wasn't really sure, how do I know if an AI product is good? How do I, as I iterate on it, how do I know that my changes, whether they're model changes or prompt changes or temperature changes, later I learned about workflow changes, how do I know if they're having any impact? And this is what led me to learning about evals. Now, when I first learned about evals, I was pretty confused. Everybody defines evals differently. And I'm just going to share like three of the very early things I read that like introduced me to evals. And then I'm going to share my simplified version of all of this, because if you're confused about evals, I get it. I feel like there's a lot of confusion out there. So this first definition actually comes from OpenAI. And it sounds like, if I read this, OpenAI is basically just saying, create some test inputs and then analyze the results. So it's like OpenAI is just defining an eval as like, create a bunch of inputs, run them through your LLM, and then analyze the results. And here's where I got stuck right away. Like, where do I get interview transcripts from? And I know synthetic data is a thing, and I played with how to create synthetic interview transcripts. It's hard. Like, an interview transcript is a lot of text, and it needs to be realistic, and I need to simulate, if I don't have real data, I need to simulate what interviewers are like as you're learning how to interview, all the variations. This felt very overwhelming to me. Like, I'm really going to evaluate good. It's going to be limited by how good that data set is. And then I started to learn about all these like eval tools. I think I posted on LinkedIn and someone was like, what eval tool are you using? And I was like, there's eval tools? And so I started to dig into the eval tools, and I started to find these very technical like Python packages. And what was interesting about this one is this one started to talk about evals as code. And I was like, oh, evals aren't just data sets or defined inputs. Some people are defining evals as code. Interesting. What does that look like? And then Aman, sorry, I'm not going to remember his name right now, his last name off the top of my head, wrote this blog post for Lenny's newsletter. And he really started to get in what are evals. And the thing that really, Aman Khan, thank you so much. The thing that really resonated with me here was he defines evals as three different ways. We have human evals, where humans can define whether it's this OpenAI definition of like human labeled sets. We can do it in code. And we can also do it with LLM as judges. And so if you, by the way, I strongly recommend Aman's work. I feel bad that I couldn't remember his last name. Thank you for the assist there. Okay, so that's also when I got introduced to this idea as LLM as judges, where you use another LLM to judge your LLM. This sounded exciting to me, but I was a little bit confused. Like, this was just a lot to learn all at once. And I ended up taking a class on AI evals, which I'll talk about in just a second. I've now built several AI evals. I have dataset evals, I have code evals, and I have LLM as judge evals. And I have done a ridiculous amount of human labeling. And this definition here that you see here is actually going to be published as part of my August 20th blog post. So on August 20th, judging LLMs is a whole different ballgame. Okay, so this definition is going to be part of an August 20th blog post where I'm going to publish some of my key lessons from building the interview coach. And here's how I want you to think about evals. Evals are just how we're going to evaluate, is our AI product good or not? And one of the things I want you to think about, if you're familiar with unit testing or integration testing, a lot of people in the AI engineering space are starting to talk about evals as analogous to unit tests and integration tests. So let me explain that analogy for my non-technical folks. When your engineers write code, like let's say the code is structured as like some functions and then maybe a process, they're writing unit tests for every function, every micro thing that they build. And the unit test is testing the logic of that thing. So for a piece of code, they might have half a dozen unit tests, and it's thoroughly testing, does the code work the way that we expect? And then an integration test is like, okay, we have a lot of these pieces of code that are all unit tested. Now we need a test that tests, do those things work together properly? And for those of you that work in an environment where you have a production product, odds are you have lots of unit tests and integration tests, and these get integrated into our CI/CD pipeline. And the way a lot of teams run these is before you push to production, all these tests run on any code change, and they tell us, is our product working the way that we expected? And that's what allows us to have a lot of confidence that our product is working. Okay, let me pause here because I know we have some non-technical folks. Is that idea of unit testing and integration testing clear? Can I get some reactions or some feedback in chat? Clear, thank you. Super helpful, excellent. Is this kind of fancy for QA? QA is a little bit different. Like actually unit tests and integration tests in a lot of ways are automating QA, which is why we don't see a lot of folks, a lot of teams having dedicated QA folks. Let me just catch up on chat. When your developers are writing their code, they're writing unit tests for every little thing. Yeah, no, a lot of engineers aren't actually doing that. So this is the ideal world, right? We talk about aspiring to full coverage with our unit tests, but we're not really there. And you're going to see with evals, we're not really there either, but we're getting there. I'm going to talk about the course in just a second. I do recommend it. Yes, and CI/CD is continue. Think about CI/CD as like your company's process for pushing code to production. Okay, yes, the AI course is AI Evals by Shreya and Hamill, and we're going to talk about it in just a second. Okay, so conceptually, I want you to think about evals as this is how we're evaluating if our AI product is any good. There are 3 primary ways of doing evals. We can create data sets where we define specific inputs and their expected outputs. And then we give the LLM all those inputs and we compare the LLM outputs to our clearly defined outputs. And we're grading the LLM based on how closely does their output match what we expected. That's one type of eval. Another type of eval is code-based assertions, where we're basically saying we're going to use code to look at the LLM response and evaluate it. And we're going to look at a couple of code-based assertions. A really common one is, like, for example, my LLM calls return structured JSON. I use a code assertion to validate that JSON. Is it what my code is expecting? And then the third type is an LLM as judge, where you're basically sending the output to another LLM and asking it to score it based on some dimension. And we'll get into those as well. Okay. Incomplete test coverage, vibe testing. Yes, exactly. Okay, let's go ahead and continue now that we have a baseline for evals, which, by the way, it took me like a solid month just to get to this point. Okay, so I wanted to know, let me go back for a second. So I started to play with these ideas on my own. And one of the things I ran into, especially with LLM as judge evals, is once you have an LLM judging another LLM, this started to feel like an infinite loop. Like, don't I need an eval to judge my LLM as judge that's then evaluating my product? And like, where does that loop end? And I just was sort of, and I wasn't really sure how to set up my data sets. I posted on LinkedIn. I got some help. The responses were very overwhelming. Everybody told me to use all these eval tools that, like, when I opened them, they scared me. Yeah, who is judging the judge? Which, by the way, is a very famous paper that I recommend reading. It is by Shreya Shankar, one of the instructors of the course I'm going to talk about. So it's about this time where I landed on the AI evals course, and I really was asking this question: how do I have confidence in my evals? And this visual comes from the reader in the AI evals course. So people that are interested in this course, it's called AI evals for engineers and product managers. It's on Maven. Here's what I'm going to tell you. A lot of people are being paid to promote this course. I was offered to be paid to promote this course. I turned it down. I don't need money to promote this course. This course is excellent. There are very few courses that I have ever taken that I will speak this highly of, and I did not want to take money for it because I genuinely believe in this course. And this visual they shared in class 1, and it immediately resonated with me. So for those of you that are familiar with my product discovery work, this resonates quite a bit. They talk about evals, the eval loop, as you first have to analyze your data. So you're looking at your traces, which we're going to talk about what a trace is in a second. You're going to analyze your data. You're going to put metrics around it so you can measure what's happening. You're going to make an improvement, and then you're going to reanalyze again. What we're seeing here is a feedback loop, which, by the way, is what product discovery is all about. So I was giddy on day 1 because I was like, oh, these are my people. And this really answered the question for me of how do I have confidence in my evals? I'm basically following the scientific method. It's very analogous to what we do in product discovery. I was off to the races. So let me explain to you what I started doing and what I learned in the course. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about a trace, because this is going to be one of the most important concepts we talk about. So this also comes from my August 20th blog post. A trace is a detailed record of an AI interaction. So if you use ChatGPT in the web browser, the trace would be the underlying system prompt, the data that you entered into ChatGPT, ChatGPT's response, and all the back and forth, right? So a trace is a full record of a user's interaction with the AI system. For the interview coach, a trace is my system prompt, the interview transcript, and the interview coach's feedback, what you saw in that email, right? Now, this idea of a trace is really important because we're going to look in this analyze step. Wow, I don't know what happened to that analyze step. I think we're going the right way. In this analyze step, what we're going to be looking at are traces. So a trace is really important. We're looking at what actually happened. Now, one thing I want to caveat, when I learned about this, when I learned that all these AI companies were looking at traces, first I was a little scared. I was like, whoa, AI companies are saving all this data, and like my AI conversations aren't private. So this raised a lot of ethical concerns for me. And one of the things that I'm going to write a lot about in my August 20th blog post is how those of us building AI products, we have a responsibility to communicate to our users that we are logging these traces. And we have a responsibility to tell them our data policies. And so with the interview coach, when you go to upload a transcript, you are consenting to letting me store your interview transcript and your LLM response for 90 days. And I'm completely upfront with that because I believe that is good data practice. So that's just one thing I want to highlight here. Okay, so I started logging my traces in Airtable. Now this is a little insane because Airtable's performance right now is pretty terrible. Transcripts are long. Why did I do this? I did this because this was a tool that I was familiar with. I was already learning a lot, and I was trying to minimize how much new I had to learn. Storing is different from training data, yes. So there's companies that are building AI products need data for a few different reasons. One of which is just observability. Can we look at your traces to figure out how to improve the product? Training is a different beast altogether, which I'm not really sure I can totally get into that and not run out of time today. But I do not train on my customer interview transcripts at all. In fact, I don't do any training, period. So let me talk about what I mean by how you'll see exactly how I'm using traces over the course of this talk. So what you're looking at here is this is my database of interview transcripts. You can see that I have the user input is the transcript. The LLM response is the coach's response. It is stored in JSON. And then one of the things we learn in the class is to analyze your traces and to look at what feedback do you have on that trace. Like as a human, do you think the coach's response was good or not? And so my very first annotation tool for human labeling, I actually used an Airtable interface. So if you guys are familiar with Airtable, I didn't build any tools. I didn't use any of the off-the-shelf eval tools. I just started with what I had, which was Airtable. And you can see here, I have a trace. So I have the, you can't see the whole thing, but I have the LLM response. I have the interview transcript. I have a little box to type in my annotation. And then failure mode, what I'm doing here is I'm first just writing my thoughts. Do I think the coach did a good job? Where were their errors? And then after I do that for a set of traces, I'm looking across my traces and I'm asking what are the most common failure modes. And so if I go back one step, these you can see in the database, these are my annotations. And you can actually see, this was my very first round of error analysis. You can see a lot of my traces have errors, right? I'm writing notes on a lot of them. And then if you look over here, these are my failure categories. A lot of traces have multiple failure categories. So the first time I did this, I was like, holy crap, my interview coach sucks. And I was very disappointed, right? I was like, there are errors all over the place. So the very first thing is we have to analyze our data. We have to look at our traces, look at what are the mistakes that your AI product is making. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take the most common failure modes and you're going to look at, can I build an eval that measures that? Right? So if we go back to our loop, it was analyze, measure, improve. So I've analyzed, I've found my most common failure modes. Now I need to come up with metrics. Can I measure how often each of those failure modes are occurring in my production traces? Right? And so that's what an eval is doing. An eval is the code that we're writing, whether it's data sets, code assertions, or LLM as judges. The goal with the eval is, can we get an accurate measurement of how often this error is happening? And this is one of the biggest takeaways I took from the class. All of you can go buy an eval tool off the shelf and it's going to measure a bunch of things. But what the eval tool is measuring is not necessarily the problems that are coming up in your product. And so they hammered on this idea of you have to do error analysis because errors are really use case specific. And so if we don't do the error analysis, we don't know what errors to measure. And this to me is one of the most important parts of this entire talk is you have to do the error analysis to figure out what to measure in the first place. Okay, so if I go back, sorry, these slides are not built super well for going back and forth. I'm going to talk through a couple of my most common error modes at this stage. Remember, this was my first round of error analysis. So there were two error modes right away that really concerned me. So remember, a student is submitting an interview transcript and then the coach is giving them feedback. Sometimes in the feedback, the coach might say something like, you missed an opportunity to build the timeline here. You should have asked what happened next, right? So sometimes in the feedback, the coach will suggest a question the interviewer should have asked. Well, two of my failure modes, most common failure modes, were related to questions that the coach suggested the interviewer asked. And the problem is, sometimes the coach suggested a leading question or a general question. Now, I want to be really clear here. It's not that the interviewer asked a leading question or a general question. It's that the coach suggested to the student that they should have asked a leading question or a general question. To me as a teacher, this is a catastrophic failure. I don't want my coach teaching my students bad habits. We don't want them asking leading questions. We don't want them asking general questions. We want them keeping their participant grounded in their specific story. So these error modes were really concerning to me, and these were actually the first two evals that I wrote. Now, when I sat down to write evals, I had never written evals before. Remember, I coded a little bit, but I didn't really know how to write evals, and so I started in an Apple Note, like literally in an Apple Note. And when I code, I always like to write pseudocode in plain English first, and then try to write real code. And I was like in an Apple Note writing pseudocode, and I was really getting frustrated with like, it kept turning regular quotes into smart quotes in my JSON. So then I would put it in my code editor and I'd have all these stupid errors, and I was getting really frustrated. And my husband is also an engineer, and at that point he said, Teresa, you should use a Jupyter notebook. And I said, what in the world is a Jupyter notebook? Now, for those of you that have never worked with coding notebooks, this screenshot is from a Jupyter notebook. Here's what a notebook gives me. This cell up here at the top is Markdown. These are my notes. So this is my name of my function. I'm defining the inputs. I'm defining the outputs. When I started, this Markdown wasn't just inputs and outputs. It was my pseudocode. It was where I started to think through, how am I going to build this eval, right? So I needed a space where I could go back and forth between like brainstorming ideas and then writing code. And for those of you that have written evals, it often takes multiple tries to get the eval right, right? And so to be able to go back and forth and have your notes right there and to be able to run the code in the notebook was really powerful for me. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you. I started this on a Sunday. Don't follow my atrocious work habits, but I started this on a Sunday. I downloaded a notebook for the first time. I had never written any Python. I'm a Node.js programmer. I had never written any Python. I literally opened ChatGPT and said, how do I use a Jupyter notebook? The reason why I used Python instead of a language I know well is because I had learned in the class that Python has these amazing visualization tools that I wanted to use. And so what I did was I started writing my notebook in Python so that I could use those visualization tools. If that's all over your head, we can do a whole separate webinar on notebooks. But what matters right now is a notebook gave me a space where I could combine my notes plus my code that I could execute plus data visualizations to allow me to dig into the data. That's what I was getting out of a notebook, all in one file. And I was not familiar with these tools when I started. I relied heavily on ChatGPT to get me through it. Okay. Yeah, and for those of you commenting, I'm seeing a lot of love for notebooks in the chat. The people nerd out on notebooks. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. One question I'm seeing is why a notebook instead of VS Code? Okay, so in VS Code, I now use VS Code. We'll talk about that at the very end. But in VS Code, like I can have an MD file in one window and my code in another window, and that's pretty nice. But for those of you that are like just experimenting and playing and you're not really sure what your code is going to do, there's something really nice about having your notes and your code in the exact same place. The other thing too is for me, notebooks are a little bit throwaway. Like it's not my production code. Like I'm still trying to figure out what I'm building. And so the use case I like for notebooks, it's almost like literally a pen and paper notebook. I'm just thinking. It's a thinking space. And then eventually I might move it into real production code. Okay, yes. So I did start this on a Sunday. I had never used a Jupyter notebook. I had never written Python. By Thursday, I had my first set of running evals. In fact, we're going to see exactly where I got by the end of the day Thursday. Okay, yes, my failure mode analysis was done manually. That's what that annotation tool that we were looking at was for. I literally labeled all of my traces, and then I did my error modes. Okay, so what we're looking at here, this is a suggests a leading question eval. This is actually you're going to see here, there's a prompt. I'm explaining to an LLM what a leading question is. This code all right here is just using some of my production code. I'm calling a Lambda function. We're not going to get into that level of detail in this. But all this eval is doing is it contains a prompt. And I'm taking a prompt and a question, and I'm sending it to an LLM, and I'm asking, is this a leading question? So this is my LLM as judge eval. To remember, I'm trying to measure across my traces how often is the coach suggesting a leading question. It turns out this worked really well. LLMs understand leading questions really well. I had to tinker with this a little bit. Like, I think I started with, here's all the questions. Are any of them leading questions? I experimented with one question at a time. I had to extract the questions. You're going to see as part of my eval setup, I have a bunch of helpers. So I do a lot of processing of a transcript and of a LLM response before I send particulars to my evals. So one thing I've learned to do an eval well, you have to really control the context you're giving the LLM. So I didn't give the LLM, here's the full coaching response. Are there any leading questions? That didn't work very well. I pulled out all the questions the LLM suggested, and I gave it specific questions and said, is this a leading question? So this is part of that experimenting that I was talking about. And the value of doing this in a notebook is I can kind of keep notes up here of what I've tried and what has worked and what hasn't worked. And then down here, I'm iterating on the code. And I can actually have separate cell blocks for all my different experiments. So one cell block could be all the questions, one cell block could be one question, one cell block could be the full LLM response. And it allows me to run experiments in parallel and measure which eval is performing best. Okay, so this is an LLM as judge eval. The LLM is judging the output of the coach. Let's look at a second one. So I talked about the LLM is, the coach was also suggesting general questions. So a general question is, tell me about your typical morning routine. I don't want someone asking that question. I want them asking, tell me about your morning routine today, right? So we're talking through a specific instance. This is is actually a code assertion eval. You can see here, I'm just looking for keywords. Typically, typical, general, generally, usual, usually. This is a really crude eval. It actually works very effectively. It is very aligned with my human labels. And so this also taught me, start with the simplest, dumbest eval because it might work, right? So this is a code assertion eval. This is an LLM as judge eval. And this was really helpful for me because remember, it was hard for me to come up with a data set for interview transcripts. Okay, I am seeing a ton of stuff coming up in chat and I'm having a little bit of a hard time keeping up. If you do have a question you want me to tackle in the Q&A, make sure you also put it in that Q&A box, just in case I miss it in chat. Okay, so here we are. I've written 2 evals. I actually to write these evals, I had to write a bunch of helper functions. So my helper functions are taking the LLM response, it's parsing out all the coaching tips. From the coaching tips, it's parsing out all the questions so that these evals aren't getting a lot of context that's irrelevant to their task. They're just getting the questions they're trying to evaluate. And this is going to become pretty important later on. So keep that in mind. The evals are more than just this code. Behind the scenes, I'm doing some transcript and LLM processing to support more efficient evals. Okay, so then I ran these evals. These are 2 of what looks like 5 evals. So I wrote 5 evals. I ran all 5 evals on my dev set. Okay, so my dev set is just my traces that I'm using to support development. So you can see here, this was my very first run of 5 brand new evals. So like I said, I started on a Sunday. By Thursday, I ran my 5 new evals across a set of traces. You can see here leading. You can see red is fail. So in 1, 2, 3, 4 of my traces, the coach suggested a leading question. In 4 of my traces, the coach suggested a general question. Answered, you can see here, it looks like this is failing a lot. This eval is the coach suggesting a question that the participant already answered. And then this eval, this was a weird one. Sometimes the coach would give feedback on the story-based question in a subsequent dimension. You can see that's pretty rare, but it did happen. And then this one was really interesting. It looks like this too much SDS. This is the coach thinks every question should be a setting the scene question. So the whole point of the interview is to build the timeline. We only want like a few setting the scene questions, but this dimension was greedy. It wanted every question to be a setting the scene question. And you can see I have a lot of failures here. So just by doing my first run, I can start to get a visual representation of how good is my coach. But I have a problem. This visual representation is only helpful if my evals are good. So the next thing we learned in the class is how do we score our evals? How do we know if they're any good? And so what we learned was to compare our eval output to our human label output, right? So I labeled all these traces. That was part of my error analysis. So now I'm going to compare what my evals found to what I found. And that's going to give me some scores. Now, I'm not going to get into all the statistics details here, but you can see my very first run of scores were kind of hit or miss. They weren't that great. So let me just walk through this first one. I know it's small. For my general question eval, it looks like there were 4 instances. You can see there are 4 instances here of failures. 3 of them were true positives. That means they matched my human labels. One of them was a false positive, which means the eval labeled it a general question, but I did not. Okay, so this table is telling me where did my label differ from the eval label. Okay, now what I want to align my LLM as judges with my human labeling. Now what's interesting is you might think I just want the LLM as judges to match my judgment completely. That's the alignment direction. But that's not what happened in practice. When I actually looked at this data, and by the way, this is where working in a notebook really helped because my notebook generated this table. My notebook generated this table, right? So by working in a notebook, I'm getting these visualizations. Okay, so as I looked at like this one, too much STS, I realized in writing the eval for determining what is too much setting the scene, I was revising my rubric. Like when I did human labeling, I was just using my intuition. That feels like too much STS. When I had to write an eval, I had to write a deterministic way to evaluate too much STS. And it turns out my deterministic evaluation was better than my human intuition. And so when I started to compare my evals output to my human output, I actually liked my eval output better. And this is really critical because now this is giving me feedback about how I can teach this to my students. It's giving me feedback about how I can teach this to my coach. So like one of the really surprising things about this whole process is I started to learn better the own material that I teach. So like this was mind-blowing to me. I was like, by trying to train an AI how to do this stuff, it's helping me better understand what I teach and what I've been teaching for years. Okay, yeah, so this question, is this the trace summary table output in the notebook? Yes, so this table with the greens and the reds, this is the summary of I ran my 5 evals across all my traces, and this is what my evals are finding. SDS is setting the scene. It's one of my coach dimensions. Okay, evals and the human grading have the same categories. That is true. So my categories came from my human labeling. I took my most common categories and I wrote evals. So categories are the intersection of both. My evals at this point were primarily on the LLM response only. So the transcript wasn't part of it. Okay. By the way, we're probably going to go long today. So if anybody's available to stick around, I will do an extended Q&A. We will probably not wrap up at the hour if you're able to stay longer. Yes, there's a lot of critical thinking in this. I love that you recognize that, David. This is what we're talking about right here is data science, right? Like this is a very data analysis. Look at the data, figure out what's going wrong, come up with a hypothesis, write an eval, look at the data, align with the human. I actually really loved this process. It was a lot of fun. The other thing that jumped out to me about this process, I realized me as the product manager needs to be involved in this process. Yes, there's a lot of engineering work here, but if I just hired an engineer to do this, no engineer without my expertise is coming up with this really simple code assertion eval of looking for typically, typical, usual, usually. I'm able to generate that because I've seen general questions over and over again, and I'm confident that captures them, right? I have to teach the LLM what a leading question is. That's my expertise as an instructor. So this started to raise a question for me about how in the world are product teams going to do this? We really have to cross-functionally collaborate closer than we ever have. Because it's probably going to be your engineer writing code, but your product manager and your designer are probably going to be involved in prompt design and even eval design. Okay, let's continue. So this was round 1. What you're staring at right here was Sunday through Thursday. I wrote 5 evals. I ran them across my traces. I got my summary. I scored my judges. And I'm like, okay, I have some work to do. But here's what was great about just getting to this point. Now I can start to look at, are my evals any good? I'm looking at aligning my evals with my human scoring. And I learned a few things. Writing evals helped me evaluate just how often my most concerning failures were happening. So I had this question of, is my coach any good? Well, now I can see, well, 4 out of 20-ish times, it suggests leading questions. 4 out of 20-ish times, it suggests general questions. Answered was a problematic one that I clearly had to dig into. And too much SDS was clearly a problematic one I had to dig into. So this is my dashboard. It's telling me how good is my interview coach. And that was very helpful to me because I'm putting this in front of real students. I want to know what's happening. It also helped me find bugs. So one of the things that I noticed here this looks like this eval, this error is happening a lot in this middle column of answered. But what I learned when I dug into this is actually when I was pulling questions out of the coach's response, some of them were questions where the coach was saying, you asked a good question, and it was saying what the question was. And that was getting included in the list of suggested questions, and that's wrong. And so a lot of these failures weren't actually failures. And so this helped me find some like bugs in my core system, which was really helpful. And then, as I already mentioned, it helped me get further clarity on my rubric. So doing this process is actually helping me improve my course and helping me improve teaching these concepts. Okay, so how do I know if my interview coach is any good? I can now run my traces against my evals and get a score. How do I know if my model prompt temperature changes are having any impact? I can now A/B test them. I can run all my evals against what's in production. I can run all my evals against my proposed change, and I can look at this grid and evaluate, is my change better? I now have a fast feedback loop, right? I can make changes, I can run my evals, I can evaluate the impact, I can decide whether or not to release. So especially as a discovery coach that's all about fast feedback loops, I love this process. Now I can make a change and I can confidently decide, is this worth releasing? Okay, this is where I got from Sunday to Thursday. This was like back in, I want to say, late May, early June. So let me just talk about where I am today. At this point, I was working at an Airtable and a Jupyter Notebook, period. Okay, since then, a few things have changed. I have now moved to VS Code. The reason why I moved to VS Code is because I want Claude right there in the IDE with me. I want Claude to have access to my projects. I also have moved my eval code out of notebooks into real code. I want to be able to, I know I can commit my notebook to Git, but I want to run some of my evals on production traces as guardrails. In order to do that, I need my eval code to be in my repo, deployed in my dev and prod environments. And so now all my eval code is part of my normal code repository, and I'm using my notebook for data analysis. So let me just quickly walk through what that looks like, and then we will jump to questions. Okay, so I'm going to focus on, I'm sure for those of you that write code, you know how VS Code works. I'm not going to focus on the code part. I'm going to focus on the notebook part. So I set up a notebook where now I don't want duplicate code, right? So now my evals need to be in my production repo, my like regular code repo. And but I want my notebook to be able to run evals. So I set up a notebook where it doesn't have any of my eval code, but it can run my eval code from my dev environment. So I basically set up a cell block that allows me to run a single eval or all my evals. I set up, once an eval is written, I have all these visualization things. So this is actually, I ran this yesterday. These are yesterday's results across my dev set, which currently, interview transcripts are big and running evals is expensive. So my dev set is only 25 transcripts. My test set is much bigger. But while I'm developing, I work on a small set. And then before I release, I run on a large test set to make sure what I found in development holds on the larger set. So this I ran yesterday for my general evaluation. Is it suggesting a general question? And you can see previously it was happening 4 out of 20 times. I have this down to 1 out of 25 times. So this has gotten much better. And this is because I can now measure it. I can make changes. I can see if my changes are improving it. And again, what's nice is in this notebook, I'm running the eval and visualizing the results right in the notebook. Today I'm doing this in VS Code. And so when I run into a problem with the notebook, I can just ask Claude Code, like, help me fix this, which is really great. And then also in my notebook, I have diagnostic tools. So you can see here in the middle image, it's telling me 24 out of 25 traces did not have this error. One of them did. Down here, it tells me which trace had the error and what the LLM said, why the error occurred. And then I have this tool that allows me to select that specific trace and actually look at all the output from my helpers, all the output from the LLM, so I can start to diagnose why is the LLM getting it wrong on this wrong trace? So again, I'm doing all my data analysis in the notebook so that I can kind of dig into the data and explore and figure out what do I need to change to further reduce this error. Okay. The other thing that's changed is I now build my own annotation tools. This is another thing that was really advocated for in the class. Claude Code actually built this tool. So I literally just described to Claude Code, what do I need? So this is now how I annotate today. I've got a progress bar at the top. You can see I'm in the middle of annotating 25 traces. It's showing the full LLM response. I have a box to annotate. I have a box to add failure modes. It supports shortcuts so I can quickly go through and annotate my traces. I'm doing this so that I always have human labels to compare to my evals, and I make sure that my evals stay aligned with my human judgment. Okay, so I know that was a whirlwind, and it took longer than I thought. I know we're right at the hour. If you have to jump, there's one more thing I want to tell you, and then I'm going to take Q&A. If you can stick around, I'll do Q&A for like 20 plus minutes, depending on how many questions you have. But I do want to share, I'm really excited to share with you, the interview coach is live. We ran it in 2 cohorts in July. We got amazing feedback. Students kept asking for more access. This makes me so happy. I have literally never built a fully production product before where I did all of the engineering. Like, I'm very proud of this. I love it. So if those of you that are interested in getting access to the interview coach, we do have another cohort of continuous interviewing starting in September. The other thing I will share, I'm very excited about, I am partnering with Vistally to bring the interview coach to Vistally. If you're not familiar with Vistally, Vistally is an opportunity solution tree tool. They do KPI trees, and they're working on a really awesome feature to support interviews. And as part of that, we're bringing the interview coach inside Vistally. So if you do want to play around and get access to my shiny new baby that I absolutely love building, this is how you can get access to it. Okay, let's do Q&A. I'm seeing a comment in the chat that I just want to acknowledge. This is both amazing and overwhelming. I want to learn how to do it. Here's what I cannot emphasize enough. It's August right now. In April, I started this, so that's 5 months. I was a total beginner 5 months ago. One of my favorite things about LLMs, I can ask an LLM all my dumb questions, right? So like when I started in a Jupyter Notebook, I was like, what's a Jupyter Notebook? How do I get started? Why do I care? I barely knew Markdown. I was just like, how do I do a code block in Markdown, right? Like, we now have a teacher that will handle all of our stupid questions. I just took one piece at a time. The reason why I started an Airtable, even though it's a less than optimal tool for long traces, is because I knew it and it was one less thing I had to learn, right? So if you're interested in learning this stuff, first of all, I do strongly recommend the AI Evals class. That is a genuine endorsement. I was not paid for that. And then I also recommend, like, pick off one teeny tiny piece and just try it. And then pick off the next piece and then try it. And I will say, like, as part of this, the other part of this journey is that, like, when I run code in my own company environment, I don't have a concept of production. Like, all my code was business logic automation that if it failed was not catastrophic. And so also as part of this, especially because of our partnership with Vistally, I had to learn how to be a real developer. Like, I moved to an IDE. I had never worked in an IDE before. I had to set up a proper dev environment and a proper prod environment. I had never done that before. I did that through CloudFormation and AWS. I had never used CloudFormation before. I had to learn how to do proper error handling and actually write unit tests and integration tests. I never did any of this. And I literally learned all of this in 4 months. And it's because I had ChatGPT and Claude guiding me through it. So I think we're living in a time where we can do way more than we ever thought was possible. So if you are interested, I encourage you to literally just get your hands dirty and start playing. Okay, let me start to tackle questions. Again, I'm a little overwhelmed by chat. I'm going to try to catch up. But if you do have questions you want me to answer, submit them in that Q&A box. Okay, it'd be good to know what tools, APIs you are using and the cost associated with these. Yeah, everybody's obsessed with tools. I hope one of your takeaways from this talk is that you can start with the tools you already know and have. I today still don't use an eval tool, right? I'm writing my own evals in VS Code. I'm using a Jupyter notebook to do my analysis. I'm not using LangChain. I'm not using LangFuse. I'm not using Arise. I'm not using Brain Trust. I forget what it's called, right? Like I'm not using any of those. And the reason why I'm not is because they overwhelm me. Like I'm not ready for that. I also didn't want a tools perspective to influence my perspective while I was still learning. So what are the tools that I'm using? I develop in a serverless environment. All of my evals are Lambda functions. They're orchestrated via step functions. I use Anthropic and a mix of Anthropic and OpenAI models to support the interview coach. The interview coach is primarily Anthropic because I think Claude has fewer hallucinations when we're working with transcript data. A lot of my evals are OpenAI, and that's because I can use 4.0 Mini and it's pretty low cost, although that is constantly changing. So I'm not saying those are hard and fast rules. I was using the Python library instructor to guarantee structured JSON output, but I stopped using it because it breaks prompt caching for Anthropic, and I need prompt caching. That gets to the expense. Some transcripts can be really long, like 20,000 tokens. That can get very expensive because the LLM coach is multiple LLM calls on the same transcript. So I cache the transcript. So I'm paying for cached tokens on subsequent calls. If all of that is over your head, don't worry. Just know when you're building LLM tools, cost management is a big piece. I'm down to 2 cents to 20 cents per transcript run. That's all in. The coach response plus all the evals. And the variation in cost depends on the length of the transcript. I suspect that will continue to go down over time. And what's really exciting to me about that is we do rate limit this for our students right now. We will also be rate limiting it as part of the Vistally beta, but it's cheap enough we can see how people want to use it, and then we're going to try to set rate limits based on what supports actually learning. We're just trying to make sure that cost and pricing lines up. Okay, I think those are all the tools that I'm using. I use Claude Code. Like, I had to bump up to the $100 a month subscription because I was like maxing out the $17 a month subscription like every hour. Okay, are all the evals you do done during development, or do you also have some measurements and evaluations? That's for the live production coach. Yeah, right now, because right now the only people who are using the interview coach are my course students. That's not super high volume. We do cohort-based courses where we have 20 to 50 students in a cohort. So I'm not looking at thousands and thousands of traces. I actually run my evals on every trace that's coming in. We're about to release this to beta customers in Vistally. We don't have a clear picture of how much they're going to use it. So to start, I will probably run my evals on a percentage of traces. But once we have a sense of volume and I can do cost estimates for how much I can do, I would love to be able to run my evals on all traces. But we got to assess costs first. I do have a couple evals that run as guardrails. So if you're not familiar with that term, you can set an eval as a guardrail, meaning it runs before you return a response to the user. So the LLM generates the response, you run the guardrail. If the guardrail passes, you return it to the user. If the guardrail fails, you rerun the LLM response before you pass to the user. So one of the guardrails I use is to make sure I'm getting appropriately structured JSON because I can't use instructor anymore. So I have an eval that is actually parsing my JSON response, making sure it's valid. If it fails, it kicks back to the LLM to try again. I actually kick the JSON output to another LLM call and ask it to try to fix the output instead of rerunning the coach. So that's an example of a guardrail that runs in production. Okay, I have proprietary content. You mentioned privacy. Would you summarize once more how to protect our content when using the different tools? Yeah, this is a really great question. So first of all, like Airtable, AWS, Zapier, these all are SOC 2 compliant, like good data processor tools. So I'm not using like somebody's personal project and sending interview transcripts to those tools. So the first thing is if you're using third-party tools, you need to be aware of their data policies. You need to be aware of, are they using any inputs for training? I've made sure that none of my tools do any of that stuff. The only place our transcripts get sent is, so student transcripts get stored in Airtable, but student transcripts are not real customer interviews. They're practice interviews from our course. Vistally interviews will not be stored in Airtable. Only the LLM response will be stored in Airtable. And that's because those are real customer interviews. And then we're really transparent with the user about what we're collecting and how we're using it. And then I also have a data retention policy. I only keep traces for 90 days. And so I'm deleting, I have a process that deletes any data that's older than 90 days. You mentioned performance issues with Airtable. What would you have used instead? So I love Airtable. I use Airtable as my CRM. I use it as my content editorial calendar. I use it for my orders database. Like I use it a lot. I've noticed in the last 6 months to a year, my bases load really slowly, even my bases that don't have a lot of records. With interview transcripts in particular, Airtable's performance is not great when you have a text cell with really long text. And so for this particular purpose, Airtable's not the best. I'll tell you, I'm still using it. I haven't moved off of it yet, but I probably eventually will move to something like Supabase as my database for this. Why do some traces have failure modes but not annotations? Yeah, really great question. So when I was first annotating my traces, I did annotations. And then as I gained more traces, sometimes when I was reviewing them, I didn't need to write out all that text. I had already uncovered failure modes. And so I just directly annotated them with failure modes. So those, if they have a failure mode but no annotation, it's because I annotated them after I came up with my failure mode taxonomy, and I just recognized the error. So that's just something that that was from a second cycle of annotating. Keen to hear thoughts on what it means to say AI-enabled product when you introduce evals and the time it takes. Anu, I'm not sure I understand your question. What it means to any AI-enabled product when you introduce evals. Do you mean in terms of time to develop? Here's what I'll say. One thing that I'm hearing a lot of AI engineers talk about is how do we have roadmaps? We can't predict how long it's going to take to build an AI product because we don't know how long, we don't know how much work is going to be involved to get it to good, right? And so I've been working on this for 4 months now. I'm a developer of one, and a lot of that time was just me learning to be an engineer. I actually think when I build my next AI product, it'll go way faster because I don't have to learn all that stuff. I don't have to learn Jupyter or Python or dev and prod environments. I've done that. And I'm also learning this muscle of building this fast feedback loop and error analysis. So I expect the next one to go much faster, but it's still really unpredictable. And we still have to draw a line in the sand of when is good enough. So the interview coach is never going to be error-free, right? With LLMs, we're getting non-deterministic output, so we'll probably never be error-free. But when is it good enough? And that's always evolving. Anu, if I didn't get your question right, do me a favor and just submit again. And then it looks like we still got plenty of folks, so I'm going to keep answering questions. Which API did you use for LLM as judge, and what did costs look like? So this we tackled a little bit already. When I'm writing a judge, I start with kind of the best model to figure out what will work, and then once I have the eval working, I gradually move to smaller and smaller models, and I compare their performance. And then I'm looking for the smallest model that performs as well as the best model. And again, most of my evals are very inexpensive. A lot of my, if you design your evals so they're very simple tasks, let's talk about simplicity. If I give an eval, here's a full coaching response. Are there any leading questions? That's not a simple task. It's a lot of text. It's not all questions. There's lots of questions in there. So that's a complex task. If I give the LLM, here's one question. Is it a leading question, yes or no? That's a very simple task. Very simple tasks are cheap. For that particular eval, I'm using 4.0 mini, and I think I'm paying 0.001 cent. It's super cheap. Not even worth worrying about cheap. Did you have good transparency on your token usage for the coach and your evals? Yes, when you make a call to an LLM, in the response, it will tell you both input and output tokens used. So you can log that, and then you can use that data to calculate costs. So you can start to look at what did each trace cost. And I do log that because I am trying to figure out pricing. I'm trying to figure out rate limits. I'm trying to figure out, especially with this partnership with Vistally, like what is this going to cost us collectively? And so when I do store as part of my traces input tokens and output tokens, whether or not they were cached input tokens, and then I calculate an estimated cost for that trace. Do you run your evals in some sort of equivalent to a CI/CD pipeline? And where in the interaction does this show up? Yeah, this is a great question. So I'm really new to CI/CD. I'll just say that right off the bat. Remember, I just learned how to split my dev environment from my prod environment. I don't release a change in the interview coach to production unless I've tested it on my evals. And so the way that I do that is I have a dev set and a test set. So my dev set is the set of traces that I'm using while I iterate on my evals, while I iterate on my prompts, right? And then I'm looking for am I getting the performance I expect? And then my test set is a holdout set that once I think I have a change that's ready for release, I run that release on my test set. And my test set is actually 100 traces, so it's much bigger than my dev set, which is only 25 traces. And it's expensive to run that test set, right? I'm running 100 transcripts through the coach. But that's telling me, am I seeing what I saw perform in development work on my holdout set? And then if that works, I can feel confident that I'm going to run that. Now, that only works if my dev set and my test set represent what I'm seeing in production. And so I'm also constantly refining both my data set and my test set to make sure they're matching the types of transcripts I'm seeing in my production traces. So that's part of that whole data set piece. Like I have to make sure my data sets represent the diversity of usage I might get from in production. Do I aim for 100% in your test set? No. In fact, in the class, one thing they talk about is if your evals are getting to 100%, they're saturated and they're no longer measuring anything. So you don't want evals to hit 100%, right? Because remember, an eval is detecting an error. And if you don't have that error in your data set, then you don't need to be measuring that error. Now, I guess it's theoretically possible that like the error could suddenly come back. But as a general rule, 100% evals that return 100% are usually indicating you're not measuring something meaningful. So I'm not looking for 100%. What I'm looking for, it's an A/B test, right? So I made a change. I'm comparing my evals performance to what's in production, to what my change is, and then I'm looking across my evals and saying, does the change look better? Now here's what I'm going to tell you. No change is categorically better, right? It might be better on some evals and worse on some other evals. So there's still a judgment call of like, does this overall look better? Should I release it? Okay. So the question of do I run my evals in a CI/CD pipeline? Not yet. I run them in my environment before I release. I am running evals on production traces though right now. So I guess that's it's not part of my deployment pipeline, but it is part of my production process. If I'm understanding correctly, the interview coach is the initial feature of a comprehensive interview bot designed to eventually manage the entire customer interview process. Have you already conducted a first experiment with such an advanced prototype? The interview coach is just designed to give students feedback on their interviews. My goal is not to automate interviewing or to manage the entire customer interview process. It is very much just designed to be a teaching tool. Okay, I know we are way over time. I'm seeing some folks have to jump. Feel free to do that. There will be a recording. I'm going to try to tackle as many of these questions. We'll go another 15 minutes if folks want to stick around. Curious about the code assertion eval you showed us. Was it always the case that when someone uses words like typically and usually, they were asking a general question? Did you measure something like that percentage accuracy of the eval versus manual annotations? Yes, exactly. So let's go back. I believe it is this one. Yeah, so we're talking about this eval where I'm literally looking for keywords. Unfortunately, this table down here doesn't have the score. Oh, it does for the general question. You can see these are small numbers, but I showed in, actually, let's go to, sorry. Let's go here. This is my most recent run of that eval. This is compared to human data. So my eval is finding only 1 out of 25 traces have that error. And actually, this eval is 100% aligned with my judgment. So it turns out, actually, it's 100% aligned with true positives. Let me think this through. These terms still confuse me a little bit. Whenever the judge finds an error, I also found an error. I don't remember if I find errors that it doesn't find, which I think is at the heart of this question. If it does, it's like if I find an error that it doesn't find, it's teeny tiny, right? Like it's like 1% or less. So like for me, this is no longer an eval I spend time on because the error rate is so low. It's very effective. It's very aligned. Now I still run it because I'm still looking for, is it staying aligned? So I still run it, I still score it, I still compare it to human labels because I want to make sure it stays aligned. But yeah, okay, I see that there was already an answer to that question. Perfect. Where did you end up getting non-synthetic interview transcripts at the very beginning to test the interview coach? I did a couple of things. In the class, we learn how to generate realistic synthetic data. I struggled with synthetic data at the full transcript level. What I was able to do was to do synthetic data at the individual dimension level. So I could generate some interviewer turns, and I could test my individual dimensions. But really, my initial set of traces came from my own interviews, some of my instructors' interviews, and then I asked some of the alumni of our courses to submit interviews. And I used a lot of my alumni as our beta group. It looks like you have 5 evals. Is your interview coach also built with separate mini coaches to get at different lenses? Yeah, so it's not a mega prompt. We covered this in the last webinar, and you should have received an email with a link to the first webinar I did. In the first webinar, I get into like architecture patterns. So like it started as one prompt, it evolved into a workflow. Today it's still a workflow. Eventually it will probably evolve into an agent. Each dimension is its own prompt. Evals have prompts. There's some helper prompts. So there's actually many LLM calls involved in a single coach response. And if you want to learn more about some of those architecture patterns, check out that first behind the scenes webinar I did. And then also my August 20th blog post is going to share some more detail about that. Was your SDS eval LLM as judge? No, it was actually a code assertion. And really what I was doing, I'm just going to say it involves counting. It was actually a really simple code assertion that works remarkably well and helped me uncover what my own intuition was trying to measure. So that was a really fun one. Which roles do you see doing each of these activities in teams? I talked through that a little bit. I think with evals, we really need a really tight collaboration between engineers and product managers and designers because we do need domain expertise, but we also need engineering skills. What models are you using? I answered that one already. Does constantly rerunning your evals get expensive? It costs me about $3 to run my evals on my dev set. But that's if I run everything. So one of the things that I did, I mentioned my evals are designed to be really cheap, but they depend on these helper functions. The helper functions extract data from either the transcript or the LLM response. If the transcript isn't changing, I don't have to keep rerunning those helper functions. So what I do in my development environment is I run all those helper functions first, and that's about $2.40 of that $3. And then I can rerun evals and not rerun the helpers, and it's only costing me like 50 or 60 cents. So I've sort of architected it to manage costs. What's your outlook on working as a product team in the AI era? We hear a lot about different roles becoming redundant or roles crossing into other roles. I've always been a boundary spanner. I mentioned I was a front-end engineer and a designer and then moved into product management. I think we should have less boundaries between our roles. We should learn a lot more about how each other works, and I think AI is going to enable that. And I think we're going to get better at collaborating when we know more about each other's jobs. Okay. How do you know if your evals themselves are right? That's what these scores are doing. So this table is comparing my eval output to my human labeled output. So this table is helping me understand how aligned are my evals with my own judgment. And it's really important to do this because your evals could just be wrong, right? And it's actually really important to do this on a percentage of traces over time because your evals can drift with time. So this is a really critical step to make sure you don't skip. Why did I choose lambdas? Was this the easiest? Yeah, like I said, 3 or 4 years ago, I started automating some of my business logic. I didn't really want to get involved in like running software and like having to have a server somewhere. And so serverless fit that need really well. And then when I started working on this, I started using the tools I was familiar with. So it's that simple. I just didn't want to like maintain an EC2 instance or anything like that. And it actually works surprisingly well. Like I know a lot of people are using like AI specific orchestration tools, but I'm finding step functions work just fine. Now, eventually, as I move more into an agent model, I'll probably have to upgrade into one of those tools. But for now, this is more than adequate. And then what that allows me to do is it allows me to kind of delay having to learn a new thing. And so this is how I prevent being overwhelmed. I just look at like, what's the next tiny piece I have to chip off? And I know eventually I'll have to learn some of those more AI specific tools because I do want the coach eventually to be an agent. What AI tools do you use? Why and how do you decide on them? I mentioned Claude Code. I do use both OpenAI and Anthropic's models through the API and through the web browser extensively. I particularly like Claude Code right now because it lives in my IDE. It can see the context of my whole repo. And I really love the Claude Code interface. That's just a personal preference. I know people are loving GPT-5 for coding. I'll probably experiment with that at some point. But again, like I'm trying to focus on building products. I don't really want to spend a lot of time trying anything and everything under the sun. I sort of just pick up what I need given my goal. I'm a very like goal-driven learner. So I'm trying to do a thing. What's like a thing I kind of understand that will help me do that thing. So I'm not optimizing or trying to maximize my tools. I'm trying to find, I'm really satisficing, like what just gets me there. Do you annotate and assign failure modes based on pieces of transcripts like you would with qual coding in research? Yeah, really good question. Most of my annotations are about the coach's response, right? So it's more about what the coach is telling the student than it is about the interview. I do have some transcripts where as an instructor, I have tagged what's good and what's not good in detail. And I use that as part of my training set. Now, training set is a little bit misleading here. I'm not doing any fine tuning or anything like that. But I use my training set for end-shot examples in my prompts. And so I have done really in-depth human labeling of a small number of transcripts to help improve my prompts. How often do you use the Claude-generated app to update your evals? I don't know what Claude-generated app. I'm assuming, Greg, you mean my annotation tool. I am constantly human labeling traces. And that's because anytime an eval, like if I do a new eval I need to make sure I have human labels that correspond with that new eval. As I reduce errors by through evals and improvements, then I prioritize the next level of errors, and then that ends up meaning I have to do more human labeling. So it's kind of never ending. Did you try to work with LLMs in voice mode? You know what? I have Whisper Flow through the Lenny bundle, and I keep meaning to try it, but I think it would drive my husband nuts because he works right across the hall, and so I haven't started it yet, but we'll see. Very impressed by how quickly you went from novice to pro. It sounds like this was your main project for the past few months. Is that right? Just to get a better perspective, how much effort you put into it since April? Yeah, really great question. And it's hard for me to quantify this. I have been working on this as my primary project, but I've also written several blog posts. I run a course business. I manage our sales process. Like I'm a company of one. I still write social media posts. Like I do plenty of other stuff. But I have been working on the weekends and in the evenings just because I'm literally having so much fun. If I were to equate this to like a 40-hour week, like how much time have I spent on it? I would guess like 60 to 70% time in that time period, given a 40-hour week, is probably my best guess. But I also know that I probably suck at estimates, so take that with a grain of salt. When you use the LLM to learn about evals and coding, how did you assess if you can trust the reply of the LLM? I just experimented, right? Like I would ask O3 or Claude Opus. I would try things out. This is where the notebook was great. It's just throwaway code. I would try things out, see if it worked, see if it didn't work. So I don't really outsource things to LLMs. I like to use them as thought partners. And because I'm learning, I don't just take code and run it from an LLM. I like beat it up. I make sure I understand it. I ask a lot of questions. I do a lot of like, what does this line do? I don't quite get it. Because I want to make sure I really understand my code base. I want to make sure my evals are doing what I think they're doing. I want to make sure my data analysis is doing what I think it's doing. So like, I'm not vibe coding this. I am relying a lot on Claude Code, but not in a vibe coding sense, in a like pair programming thought partner. I still feel responsible for my code, so I'm making sure that I really understand all of it. And I think that's pretty critical. Can you talk through how to approach, how to analyze and evaluate a long LLM interaction like an interview? Is it per response? And if so, does it include all the previous responses as context? So James, I don't have experience with this because this is literally the only AI product that I have built so far. But I know in the class that I took, there is a whole module on multi-turn conversations and how to evaluate them. So if you want to learn more about that, I do recommend checking out that AI evals course. David, it looks like the most important thing is to just start. Yes, absolutely. So impressive to see how much you're done. How did you manage the roadblocks? This feels more about mental fortitude and following your energy. Yeah, okay. So first of all, I think with vibe coding, we get stuck because we don't understand what the LLM is doing. And I've vibe coded. I built things with Lovable and Replit. Replit, I got stuck several times. Lovable, I actually got stuck and had to start over with an app. With vibe coding, like I'm not even looking at the code. I'm just assuming the LLM's doing the right thing. This is really different. I'm having a conversation with the LLM about how to write the code. If it's generating the code, I'm reviewing it and making sure I understand every line of it. If something doesn't make sense to me, if I don't like a pattern, I debate with the LLM. So think about this more like I'm sitting with another engineer and we're constantly having a conversation about how to build a thing where I'm like hands-on with the code. And as a result, I'm not getting stuck because I understand the code, right? And so this is very different from this like black box vibe coding, hoping I don't get stuck. Have you thought about teaching a course on this? You know, I have, but the challenge is this AI evals course is really good. Like, I don't think I can do a better job than them. Their course is very technical. And so like maybe eventually I'll do something on this, like for less technical folks. But I'm not trying to like race to be first. I don't know. I think I care about quality too much. I don't really feel like an expert yet. Maybe that's a little bit of imposter syndrome on some of this on my part. But there's a lot of noise out there, and I'm trying really hard not to contribute to the noise and just share my experience. Okay, how do you get from where you were at the beginning of May to where you are now? Maybe mainly from a technical setup standpoint. What is the best way to learn how to set up Jupyter notebooks for my code base? Yeah, Dylan, I just started with ChatGPT and I just said, I'm writing pseudocode in an Apple Note. I'm getting stuck. It turns my quotes into smart quotes. It's breaking my code. My husband says to use a Jupyter notebook. Can you help me get started? I'm a total beginner. That's what my prompts look like. Like my personal prompts are garbage. Like I just literally talk to ChatGPT like it's a friend that won't make fun of me for my dumb questions. And then because we can go back and forth and refine, like it just guides me. And like we've never had a tool like this before. Like we literally can learn anything. I think this is the thing that's most exciting to me. So I would say just start somewhere. And like if you already have code to play with, like I would just probably start with Claude Code. Although I will say notebooks in VS Code isn't as nice as notebooks in Jupyter Lab. So maybe if you're new to notebooks, I would start in Jupyter Lab and run Claude Code in a terminal or have ChatGPT open in another window because the Jupyter Lab experience is much nicer than VS Code. In fact, I will probably switch back to Jupyter Lab over VS Code. Can we make this using Lovable or is Claude Code better? Yeah, the big difference here is with Lovable. Again, I'm a big fan of Lovable. In fact, tomorrow's blog post that's being released on Product Talk is 11 real world stories about how product teams are using Lovable. So like this is not a diss on Lovable. What I like about Claude Code in VS Code over Lovable is I am hands-on in the code. It's not a black box. It's my repo. It's my code. It's my responsibility. And I'm pair programming with Claude Code. It's a lot harder to do that with these AI prototyping tools. What if your tweak caused the coach output to generate a new class of errors that wasn't tracked by the evals? Clay, this is a really great question. I hope you're still around for the answer. If not, maybe you'll catch it on the recording. It is very often the case that I'll fix one error and then a new error will start to pop up. And this is why I'm continuously human labeling. It's why I'm continuously running evals on production traces, because I do think this is a continuous investment. I don't think the interview coach will ever be done. This is part of the lessons I'm going to share in my August 20th blog post. I think when we build AI products, we have to commit to evolving them continuously over time because they will drift. And if you care about quality, it will require a continuous investment. Can you go into some specifics around your tool change strategy? What kind of prompt changes work and what's a temperature change and chunking strategy change? Keith, these are really great questions. I think we'll probably have to do another session on those because we are way over time. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep the rest of the questions and maybe record some short videos, or we'll do another webinar because it is already 10:30 Pacific and many of you have stuck around for a very long time and I really appreciate it. If this was helpful, do me a favor, give me some feedback. You can reply to any of the emails that I sent you about this webinar. You can reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm really enjoying building this tool. I'm really enjoying working out loud. I'm trying to find ways to be helpful without being like AI hype. So give me feedback on how that's resonating because I'd love to know if I should keep doing this. All right. Thank you, everybody. I love that you stuck around for so long.